right. Today's Wednesday, April 13th. We're back in our usual time slot. This is In the Box, a Florida Panthers show presented by the Fifth Line 5-Hour crew over at the Five Reasons Sports Network. You know us by now. Alex Baumgartner, Jamie Goldman. We're here to talk to you about the Florida Panthers and specifically what's going on in the Eastern Conference. But before we get into that, Jamie, just say what's up to the fans.
What's up, guys? How we doing? Another great comeback win last night. You love to see it. Let's jump right in.
Yeah, so no beating around the bush. We see it all the time. Panthers win. Panthers come back win. They're hot. They've been hot all season. Hit 300 goal mark on the year. They're explosive. You guys know that by now. You guys watch the game. We're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about what's really important, and that's the real dance. We know the Heat and NBA, their real dance starts this weekend. We got a couple more games before we know who we're going to play in the playoffs. But right now, the Florida Panthers sit first place in the Eastern Conference, first place in the Atlantic Division, and one game behind, but same amount of points with Colorado for first place in the NHL. By the way, as you guys know, I don't want them to win the President's Trophy, but we can get into that later. Yep, the Florida Panthers are first place in the Eastern Conference, which is extremely important because that means you get home ice advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs, not just the first round, not just the second round, or excuse me, throughout the entirety of the Eastern Conference playoffs. So that's the first 3 rounds you'll get home ice. And the way this Eastern Conference is lining up, there is an extremely good chance that 7, if not all 8 of the playoff teams will finish the season with 100 points, which is ridiculous because when you look at the Western Conference, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, you look across the Eastern Conference, and this might be the most loaded it's been in a number of years. I mean, you got teams like Washington and Pittsburgh with some of the greatest players in the league, and Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin, and they're towards the bottom of the top 8 in the East. And you look, and I don't see one weak link in the top 8 in the Eastern Conference. You know, you love to see the Florida Panthers at the top, but you look throughout the whole East, Atlantic Division and Metro Division. I mean, you got Florida, you got Tampa, you got Toronto, you got Boston, and then on the other side you got Washington, Pittsburgh, like I already mentioned, and there's just a slew of good teams. And no matter who you face, it's gonna be a real challenge in round 1 and round 2 and round 3. So having that home ice is so important, especially the way the Panthers have been playing on home ice this season.
And as I said, you will not know who the matchups are for quite a while. You still don't know where the Panthers are going to finish in the standings. It is important to note, in terms of their own division, they are 10 points clear or 5 games clear of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And they both have 73 games played, and they are 14 points clear of Tampa. Tampa is not catching Florida. It is almost extremely unlikely, unless Florida has an astronomically terrible last 9 games of the season and Toronto wins out, that they're going to jump them. Carolina has one more game played than Florida, and Florida's still 6 points ahead. So it's be nice to keep that lead on Carolina. Other than that, there's really no one that's going to chase Florida in the Atlantic besides Toronto. And in the Eastern Conference, it's a little bit closer in the Metro with Carolina and the Rangers, both 74 games. There's only a two-game lead for Carolina. Florida's focusing on themselves. They've been playing just perfectly fine with that. And, you know, they're getting the rewards. But if we move a little bit down, as we can see 6 through 8, 5 through 8, 96 points, 95 points, 95 points, 92 points. Florida has a chance of playing any of those 4 teams. And as Ethan put up today on the poll, who would you rather see? Well, you're facing 4 teams that have been to the Stanley Cup final in the last 5 years. So that's no easy matchup by any means in the first round if you're playing a back-to-back Stanley Cup champion, or the team that won it, the team that lost it before then, or the team that won it before then, or the team that went back-to-back the 2 years before then. So you got plenty of teams with playoff experience, where you have the Panthers that haven't been out of the first round since 1996. So no matter what, as we know, the NHL is different league when it comes to the playoffs. I don't really care who they play.
Yeah, I don't really care who they play either. And like you mentioned, it's the really thing that comes down to it is the teams at the bottom of the Eastern Conference right now, 5 through 8, they have a ton of experience in the playoffs. Like you mentioned, Tampa just won back-to-back Stanley Cups. Boston's been in the mix. Pittsburgh's been in the mix with Sid and Malkin for years. You had Ovi finally break through and win his first couple seasons ago. I mean, these teams have experience, so it's going to be tough for the Panthers, a team that doesn't have a ton of experience, like you mentioned, haven't made it out of the first round since '96. Matching up against one of those teams, that could be something that maybe one of the only advantage that the other team has over the Panthers in a series like that. When it comes down to who I want to see, personally, just for the rivalry, I want to see Tampa. You know, we saw them last year. We gave them a run for their money. And then, unfortunately, they beat us, and eventually Tampa Bay won the Stanley Cup. But I think this is a different season. I think this is a different Panthers team. And I think if they were to see each other in the first round, it doesn't look too likely right now, but there's still a lot of season left. There's about 9 games, and Tampa only has a 4-point lead on the 8th seed. It very well could be Tampa, but it could easily be Boston. It could easily be Pittsburgh. It could easily be Washington. No matter what, like you said to start it off, Florida's got to focus on themselves. They got a little bit of a cushion, like you mentioned, in the Atlantic. They got a bit of a cushion on top of Carolina for the entire East. I personally want them to win the President's Trophy. I think we're the team that breaks the cycle, but we can get into that later. And I mean, if you're the Panthers right now, you just got to keep firing on all cylinders. Keep playing the way you're playing. Keep rolling.
Yeah, so just based off of looking through 5 through 8, 8th seed, I watched them play Washington at the beginning of the season. I said, this is a matchup that could happen, and it's not going to be a matchup that Washington's going to get swept. It's going to be a hard-fought series. They got some big checkers with Tom Wilson, obviously Alex Ovechkin, one of the greatest goal scorers of the modern era, actually of all time. Their goaltending is not as good as, say, a Tampa come playoff time. Vasilevsky, if he keeps it going, as he does in the playoffs, it's a different beast. And Pittsburgh, where Tristan Jarry is top 10 in legitimately every single major goaltending stat between goals against average, save percentage, shutouts, wins. That goaltending paired with Sidney Crosby, who just hit his 1,400th point and can still play high-level hockey, Evgeny Malkin, Jake Gensel. I mean, just the center matchups alone would be a very interesting series if you play Pittsburgh. And also, Crosby's one of the better two-way centers the last decade. Patrice Bergeron was the favorite Selke winner, but a Selke contender between him and Pavel Datsyuk for years and years and years. And then you threw Kopitar in the mix, and now you got Barkov. So those two teams have extremely strong defensive centers, which would match up pretty nicely against Barkov. Now, the thing with the Panthers is they have 4 lines, and you realistically have 3 lines that could be a top line. So Pittsburgh, I like their centers. I like their goalie more than the other 2 that we mentioned. Chris Letang, still a veteran on the back end. Here, let's get to Tampa, though. Not a great regular season by any means, but also that really doesn't matter when you have a team that's won 2 Stanley Cups with a pretty much entirety of this roster, when you've had one of the best defensemen since entering the league in Victor Hedman, who I think has been pretty underappreciated this season, despite what he's been doing in the Norris conversation. You still have Steven Stamkos. You still have Braden Point. You still have Kucherov. I like Mikhail Sergachev on the back end. Yeah, I'd like to play Tampa and I like to beat them. But if I'm looking for an ideal first-round matchup, it's probably not them, because I still think with the depth they have and the goaltending they have and the 4 future Hall of Famers they have, it's going to be a tough battle for the Panthers to come up against a playoff experienced team like them.
Yeah, and no matter who you see, like you mentioned in that 5 through 8, you're going to see someone who has a bit more playoff experience than the Panthers do, most likely. You mentioned the Tampa matchup being tough because of their playoff experience and the fact that they have those 4 future Hall of Famers and that stacked roster. But on the flip side to that, when you think about the potential of playing Tampa in the first round, they're a team that's won back-to-back Stanley Cups. One of them in the bubble. After that was a short offseason. They have gone deep into the playoffs before that as well. This is a team that's continually going deep into the playoffs with basically the same roster, like you mentioned. A bit of fatigue starts to set in after a while, especially third season running now with basically the same unit. I mean, obviously that's not something that you want to bank on if you're the Florida Panthers, but it's definitely something that is an impact when you're thinking about who you want to see in the first round. If we were to see Tampa, if Panthers were to see Tampa Bay Lightning, I think fatigue would definitely play a factor, and the fact that the Panthers are just so hungry and the fact that they haven't gone deep into the playoffs, I think would play a big factor in a series like that. Now you move on to like Pittsburgh or Washington or Boston, like you said, and when you think about Pittsburgh, they have the goaltending stud, like you said, in Jari, but he's been this great in the regular season, but regular season hockey and playoff hockey are two very different things. So do you think he'd be able to keep that going in the playoffs? I don't really know, especially going against a team with the firepower offensively like the Florida Panthers do. I mean, you saw Gibson shut the door on us last night, but that's a tough task for a team that puts up, I don't know the exact number, but probably 40-plus shots a night.
Well, I'll have 2 comments to that. So, just on the Tampa one, I do agree with fatigue that can play a factor, but also you mentioned short off season, but that was also short season. You have 2 shorter seasons for the Lightning, so I think it kind of counteracts, where it ends up. And also, a lot of those guys have had some time off. It's not like they've been playing 82 games straight, and then 30 playoff games in a year. You know, Kucherov didn't play the entire regular season last year. We know about that. Hedman missed a lot of time. Stamkos has missed a lot of time through that. And if they stay healthy, I mean, I don't think fatigue's the biggest of their worries. I think it's just being able to, shut the door again on an explosive team like the Panthers. So I think that's the biggest concern for Tampa. It's can they keep their play up while missing lots of players that were big on that cup run, like a Barclay Goodrow, like a Blake Coleman, Yanni Gord, those guys that aren't there anymore. That's one thing. Now, in terms of Tristan Jarry staying hot, I mean, we can pretty much say that about any goalie in the league. I think the only one that I really have no concern about in the Eastern Conference staying hot is probably Shesterkin. Other than that, look, I watched Toronto play a couple days ago. I watched them against Florida. I don't know how healthy Jack Campbell is. It seems like they're trying to give him some days off. I don't know what's up with Mrazek, but Shalgren doesn't look that good. So Toronto better hope that Jack Campbell's ready to go, and they better hope he doesn't tweak anything again, because Mrazek's been shaky the whole season if they have to throw him in there. And quite frankly, Shalgren's not going to win them anything.
Yeah.
He's not going to steal them a series. Where, at least with Florida, if you can't ride Bob, at least Spencer Knight's, they're 100% confident in riding him. And then, as we've seen with Bob, if he gets kind of slow, gets a couple days off, he comes back in and all of a sudden he's, prime Bob again. So in terms of goaltending, a goalie can steal you a series. I have more confidence in Tristan Jarry than maybe a Swayman on Boston or, yeah.
Yeah, I want to expand on what you said about the Panthers goaltending situation with Bob and Spencer Knight. I really love the fact that Spencer Knight has been in the playoffs before. I mean, you think like he's so young and so inexperienced, but you look last season and they threw him in they kind of threw him in the deep end in that Tampa Bay Lightning series, and he started a couple games in that series and he really showed out. And yes, he's had his struggles this season following up that Lightning series. But after he struggled, the Panthers put him in the AHL for a little bit. He started to regain some confidence. He came back to the NHL, and since coming back to the NHL, he's looked very solid. So I really think for the Panthers going into the playoffs, it's I think right now you start Bob game one, but like we said in our last show, his leash is very short with a guy like Spencer Knight back there champing at the bit to get in the net in a playoff game.
Yeah, we're gonna probably have a discussion about this right when the playoffs start. We're probably gonna dedicate a stream just to this. But yeah, like I think Bob can still struggle the next 3 games and he'll still get that spot in the playoff. I think the way he played for the majority of the season, just the amount of wins he has, and with the offensive production the Panthers they have the confidence that even if they give up the 3 goals, they'll win a game. Now, you're gonna want your goalie to steal you a game or two in the playoffs, and I still think that Bob can do that. I think even if he gives up 1 week one, you can still win that game 4-2, 5-2. Because I still seen him, you know, give up a weak one and then stand on the top of his head. And I could say the same thing with Spencer Knight. So now we will have to see, as we talked about, are the goalies ready for the playoffs? It's for every goalie. Because, yeah, we talk about Shesterkin, too, having a historical season. And even though I think he'll do just fine in the playoffs, um, yeah, he's had success in Russia, but NHL playoffs is a different beast. So it's going to be very interesting in the Eastern Conference. I think we saw at the deadline, it was an absolute arms race. Everyone was trying to compete to get an edge on the next team because as we can see right now, you got some hot teams riding into the playoffs, not just Florida. You have a hot Washington team who's kind of just been pumping everyone recently. And then you've got a couple struggling teams where you don't really know where they're going to lie. Um, the Panthers having that cushion is extremely beneficial. Also, I think the Panthers just their goal differential, you can just see plus 89. Um, they're gonna score in the playoffs. I have no question about that. Now, how healthy Aaron Ekblad is come round one is gonna be absolutely huge. We don't know anything yet, and I'm gonna leave it to the announcement when we hear he's back and ready and what game it will be. Until then, I won't say anything because we don't know. They missed him last year. They're going to need him this year. The Western Conference, Colorado's riding hot as they usually do. Oh, we're going to look at this tweet. So, if you don't know who producer Drew is, he's a producer on Steve Dangle show at Sportsnet. He posted the top 10 NHL teams in regulation wins. He went on to say Florida wins a lot of fake hockey games, 3-on-3. He's a Colorado fan. Don't know if this was just a kind of like a bait one. I'm not going to get into this. But if Goldie wants to get into it, go ahead.
I mean, that's a little bit of a low key shot at the Panthers. Kind of calling us, I guess you could say, overtime teams, and we don't win as many regulation games. But I mean, you look at you can't fault us for winning those games. You can't fault the Panthers for winning games like that. I mean, like the overtime period is a part of the game, and like if the game goes to overtime, so what? The Panthers have been great in the overtime period. That's not something that you can fault the Panthers for. I mean, it's a tough tweet just to see a couple of those Atlantic Division teams above us, and then even Carolina in the Metro. But I don't think that's something worth being concerned about heading into the playoffs.
I mean,
I mean,
realistically, it's just that one team in the Atlantic, Toronto, and hyping up
oh,
Toronto right now after that Buffalo game. I don't know.
right. I mean, that was ugly. You were in attendance for that one,
I
so
was there. I was loving it, but
yeah, you could probably speak more on that one. But you look at the Western Conference and like the parity from the East to the West is just so crazy. Like you mentioned, most Eastern Conference playoff teams are probably going to land at least about 100 points. And you're looking in the West right now, and you got Vegas still got a shot with 85 points. LA has 88. I mean, these teams aren't even at 90 yet with only 9-10 games remaining in the season. So it really goes back to what you were saying about the Eastern Conference just being so loaded, which for the Florida Panthers, like, sign me up. Let's go. We need the challenge, I love it personally. Because another thing, you're going to start the playoffs playing against a very high caliber team. It's not going to be like a cruise through the first round, no matter who you end up seeing, which is great because right off the bat, you're going to be playing high level playoff hockey. And not to say that any team making the playoffs in the West is like undeserving, but I mean, you look at the bottom teams in the East and you look at the bottom teams in the West, and I just think there's a big difference.
Look, the NHL is so different from the NBA. When you look at the NBA and you have a first seed, Miami Heat, and you're gonna have the eighth through 10th seed, whoever they play, which is also a crazy thing to me. I was talking about it today. Be kind of interesting, but the NHL would never do that. I think they said they wouldn't do it. I wouldn't want to see that just because of the kind of sport hockey is. But the first seed in whatever division playing the eighth seed in whatever division in the NHL is still a series that can realistically go 7 games. And yeah, you'll have your favorite, even in the West. Colorado's going to be the favorite going in, but we've seen plenty of teams upset. We've seen plenty of President's Trophy teams lose in the first round. Whereas the NBA, it's a lot more, if this guy turns it up one night, he drops 50 points, the other role players drop 15, 20, you're not going to lose. Hockey's a 1-goal game, especially in the playoffs. Sometimes those hungry teams will catch a powerhouse by surprise and physicality and bounces in time of possession or just the lucky bounces, and you get one bounce and you win the game. So I think there's going to be no easy going for any team in this playoffs. This is going to be the best playoffs that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And like you mentioned, hockey's a game of bounces. One puck could bounce one way, and that could completely change the series on its head. We've seen that kind of thing happen. But for the Panthers' perspective, it really just goes to show you can't take any team lightly. And even in these next 9 games to close out the season, I mean, they've been red hot up to this point. I think they've won their last 7 or 8 games. I don't know the exact number, but this team's been red hot, and they have been playing with the mentality of we can't take any team lightly. One thing that I haven't loved is it seems like every night you turn on the game in the first period and you're down 1-0. That's been a little bit of a cause for concern, but every time they seem to get down, we saw it twice when they were down 4 goals. We saw it the other night against Buffalo. We saw it last night against Anaheim. This team, no matter what kind of hole they get in, they always seem to fire back and end up coming back and winning the game. So I really love the fact that this team has been so persistent, and they kind of have that never say die attitude. They can get down a couple goals and they'll still be like, okay, we need to turn on the offense. It's not like, oh man, I can't believe we're down a few. Like, we'll look to Tuesday night. Like, no, we're still in this game. There's still time on the clock. We're going to finish it out. And that's the way you got to be.
Just looking ahead, you have your next matchup on Friday against a very desperate Winnipeg team, a team that is fighting desperately on the outside looking in to try and get one of those wild card spots in the West. Then you got Detroit. They're not fighting for a playoff spot. And then you got the Islanders. By the time you play the Islanders, there's a very, very, very good chance statistically they are eliminated from the playoffs. So, yeah, you might have a team coming out for, damn, let's just put it all out there at that point. But you got a 4-game stretch, Winnipeg, Detroit, Islanders, Detroit. And then you got the big boys who also might be a little desperate because you got Toronto and you got Tampa and you got Boston. So you got those 3 in a row. And I said a couple weeks ago, realistically, I think there's a very good chance the Panthers have a lock on that first seed if everything goes well by that point in the Atlantic. Now, maybe the Eastern Conference battle is a little tougher, and you might have to win 2 of those 3 games before you move on to Ottawa and Montreal. So you got 9 games. You got about 4 to 5 games that are like non-playoff teams, end of the season. You're putting in some new players. They're putting in some college players, the non-playoff teams. You see that a lot. It's a trap game. Happened to Toronto. They got swept by Buffalo. Owen Power made his debut. No problem. 5-2 Buffalo win in Toronto. These are trap games. So you're going to want to ride it hot going into the playoffs and make sure you keep your playoff home ice advantage. in the
Yeah,
stretches.
I mean, you see that kind of thing all the time with trap games. I mean, honestly, last night's Ducks game, I was a little bit concerned it was going to be a trap game, down 2-1 in the third period. But of course, they came back and won the game. But you look at the next 9 games, and you mentioned it's kind of like there's a stretch of some teams that aren't going to make the playoffs, and then you see 3 games with the big boys, and then there's 2 more teams that aren't going to make the playoffs to end it. And I honestly really like that for the Panthers because in the next 4 games, you can kind of fine tune your lineup. You can play with some things like Brunette has been doing. You know, we've seen Mammon, we've seen some other guys slot in and out of the lineup. He's been messing with the lines a little bit, and he'll have that experimentation period. And then the next 3 games with the Toronto, Boston. What's the third one?
Toronto, Tampa, Boston.
Toronto,
Toronto,
Tampa,
Tampa back
Boston.
to back.
Tampa was the one I was missing. Those 3 games, even if the Panthers have the 1 seed locked up, chances are one of those other teams, Tampa, Toronto, Boston, is going to be fighting for whether it be a spot, whether it be home ice advantage, whatever it may be. Chances are not every single seed in the East is going to be locked up with 5-4, 5-3 games to play, you know?
I mean, just looking at the Metro, I don't think even if Florida keeps winning, I don't think you can clinch until that Tampa game at the earliest for the East. So they're gonna be full lineups at that point, and you kind of just have to finish your business as we were talking about, and then expect some maintenance days on that back to back in Ottawa and in Montreal. Expect some maintenance days for some of the big boys, as they did last year against Tampa, when like 10 of the guys just weren't playing.
Yeah. I mean, in those 2 games, chances are there's not going to be a lot on the line. Why risk injuring one of your best players, one of your best offensive or defensive, whatever, whoever it may be? Like, why even put them in that risk? So I understand. On the other hand, if those games do mean something and there is something at stake for the Panthers, I don't see the Panthers resting their big boys. Now, the way things are going right now, and with the schedule that the Panthers have in the next couple games, chances are they'll have the number 1 seed, at least in the Atlantic Division, locked up by then. And if that's the case, I don't want to see Barkov playing that game. I don't want to see Huberdeau playing that game, risking an injury. And it'll give guys who probably haven't seen a ton of time an opportunity to see some NHL ice. So that'll be great to end the season. And then after that, it's time to strap on the hard hat, and this is the most important playoff in Panthers history, in my opinion.
Yeah, you said it best. It's the most important one. You got a short window. Realistically, this is your window because you're not going to have this same team next year just with all the UFAs you picked up at the deadline. So it's time to win. It's time to hunt.
It's time to hunt.
But yeah, the Charlotte Checkers also have a playoff spot, so good for the young guys out there. They'll be tearing it up in the AHL playoffs, going for the Calder Cup. Big boys are going for Lord Stanley. My friend gave him a quick little bath today. We don't talk about that. But yeah, we'll see you guys next time. Make sure you subscribe to the 5 Reasons Sports YouTube channel. Turn on those post notifications so you can see all of the Panthers content, as well as all the other playoff content for the Heat that we have coming on the channel. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at FifthLine5R, where you'll find all of our game tweets, all of our updates, press conference retweets, stuff like that. We got that over there for you. I told you guys a couple months ago, we're going to gear it up come playoff time, and we're gearing it up right now. A lot of content coming out here from a South Florida outlet covering the Florida Panthers. So make sure you stay tuned, and thank you so much for everyone that's been on this ride for the last two seasons with us. Brand new thing, but I'm happy that, we've had a nice little fan base. But yeah, other than that, from Alex, from Goldie, we'll see you guys next time on In the Box.